Welcome to our keynote panel, moderated by Dr. Zina Jarrahi Cinker, Director General at Matter. Dr. Andreu Mas-Colell, founder of Barcelona School of Economics. Ms. Cristina Gallach, Honorable Representative of Ministry of Economy of Spain. Dr. Eduard Vallory, Director General at BIST. And Dr. Paul Smith, COO of Perimeter Institute.
Wow, we're sitting on some... Please, Cristina, okay. Paul, sit next to me.
Well,
free seating.
Free seating.
Free seating. Are we comfortable with our seats?
We are.
Yes? Okay, great.
This place.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our panel about the ingredients that make science and basic science go from research lab into commercialization and impact. This is a power panel. With us, we have a certain weight. We've got Dr. Andreu Mas-Colell, we've got Cristina Gallach, and somebody needs to stop that thing right now. So please, somebody tell them, stop. Thank you. We've got Eduard with us and Paul with us from Perimeter Institute. This topic is very close to my heart because my background, I'm a condensed matter physicist. And sometimes the people ask me, why are you guys doing what you're doing in the lab? And we would say, it doesn't have any applications. I say, well, why are you doing it? I say, for the sake of science, right? Many people among us don't know the value of basic science, deep science for the sake of science. So I'm going to ask the first question. Why on earth basic science? Why on earth are we talking about deep science? Paul, can I start with you, please?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Zina. It's a pleasure to be here. And I have to say, Barcelona is beautiful. I've never been before. It's amazing. So I'm from Perimeter Institute, and Perimeter Institute is a very, very large independent theoretical physics institute based in Waterloo, Ontario, in Canada. And it was really set up for that one sole reason of curiosity-driven research, right from quantum right through to the cosmos. And it was set up by Mike Lazaridis, actually, who was the head of BlackBerry. He put a third of his personal wealth into this for this sole reason, because he believed that the future of the world depended upon basic science and, really looking out 50 to 100 years. And so maybe I can give a bit of an anecdote of why that is important. And to do that, you could look at a book that was written by Abraham Flexner, who was he was the very first director of a world-renowned institute, the Institute of Advanced Study, which actually is in Princeton. It was set up in the 1930s. And they have maybe 35 Nobel Prize winners, Wolf Awards winners, really fundamental long-range research. And Flexner was having a discussion with John Eastman, who was the head of the Eastman Kodak Foundation. And this was in a book that was written by Flexner called The Usefulness of Useless Information, or Useless Knowledge. And so he had the discussion with John Eastman, and John Eastman had said, I am going to put my entire foundation into useful subjects, to educate useful subjects. And so Flexner said, what do you define as a useful subject? And so Eastman said, well, at the time, obviously radio was big, and it was kind of building the world together. And so he said, Marconi, he was this person, he built the radio, and this is a really useful subject. Actually, there was another view to that from Flexner, who obviously loved curiosity-driven research. He said, well, actually, I probably don't agree with you, because really the foundations of radio came from James Maxwell in 1865, actually 30 years before the radio was ever built. The fact that the forces of electricity and magnetism were the same, and then Hertz, 10 years later, developed into really what was a radio, just to reduce these theories to practice. And so if you really look at that, what really was the start of something practical. It was really this fundamental research. Now, I have to make a proviso here because we're being recorded. I know people are going to write to me and say that Tesla invented the radio. I accept it. But in the book, it wasn't. It was Marconi, all right? So I just make it correct. But I think really that really comes down to this phrase. How do you set your horizons, not by the problems that you have, but by the curiosity of your imagination? And that really is what drives the world forward.
Thank you, Paul. And I think when we look at all the technologies that we use every single day, these are the results of basic science, right? And it takes, how long did it take for lasers? 40 years?
Yes.
Yes, 3-4 decades? It will take time. I think exploratory science and the basic science are the foundation of what we will see decades later to come. Eduard, would you have any other comment on that?
Yeah, I'm going to try to complement the Paul's approach. I'm the director of the Barcelona Institute of Science and Technology, which is an institution of scientific cooperation of 7 frontier research centers, biomedicine, bioengineering, genomics, photonics, nanotechnology and nanoscience, physics of high energy and chemistry. And the goal of the institution is to bring them together to promote multidisciplinary research, cooperation, and to increase the impact. And so the question is particularly relevant on what they are doing. But to be properly complementary, I'm going to take one of my academic backgrounds, which is philosophy. When we talk about basic research, we would imagine that this is something that only applies to science, but basically there is a curiosity-driven research is the basic impulse of humans trying to understand. Sometimes not just understanding, but trying. And this is something that brings together our wonder for the fact of knowing or not knowing, our interest to not just predict what could happen, but also to try to imagine what is beyond the curtain. And this had been for centuries the most important element on human progress. And it has been led by 2 different elements. One is basic curiosity, and the second, cooperation. This cooperation is something that defines science because we learn about, we move the frontiers of knowledge by trying to understand what other people had been doing in the same direction. This logic of cooperation is what we call the scientific community.
Yes.
And when we talk about basic science, I would move to the idea of frontier research, because in the frontier, you know who else is trying to push, and you start working with them for this common endeavor, which is to try to transform somehow this black area into something with more color.
I love this because probably many of you who know me, when I describe this, I say, here's a circle, and there are basic science researchers who are pushing the boundaries into this abyss. We don't even know where it is. They're pushing the boundaries. They don't look back. They are the ones that are really going out there, paving the path, and they have a very good connection with themselves. Sometimes they don't have good connections inwards, right? With the community, with the industry, but they have a very good connection for that reason. Andreu, may I look to you for basic science?
Let me see, I am an economist, so I am a social scientist, or very involved with matters of research. I don't think I will emphasize here the need of basic science, because I have the intuition that everybody in my audience believes it. let me just say that the importance of basic science also applies to the social sciences. The social sciences are different from the physical science because let me say it that way, our particles are individual beings that think for themselves.
I love
think in
that.
particles, and that changes everything. For example, they are particles that anticipate the future. Sometimes we say that in basic science in economics, it's the future that determines the present and not the past that determines the present, because anticipations determines what we do, etc. So basic science is very important. It's important across the board, and it links with curiosity research. We may talk about this later on.
I like that a lot. Is there a name for that? Basic science for humanities. Is there such a thing? There should be, right?
It should.
There should be basic science for humanities sciences. Very interesting. I love that perspective. Maybe Andreu knows. Is there a name for that field?
For basic
science for humanities.
Maybe Cristina can answer
can you
that
come?
because she's involved in the humanities.
No, I think it looks good. It reads good. Basic science for
Basic
humanities.
science for humanities. Yes.
It reads even better. Basic science for humanity.
Okay.
Because I
Basic
think
science
that's
for
the key.
humanity. Yes.
Humanity, right? Not science for science, but science for humanity.
I like that a lot. And maybe, Andreu, I'm going to come back to you for this question. Basic science. Many of us who are in basic science, sometimes we never look outwards beyond basic science. Commercialization, concept of patents, for many of you in the audience, might be a very unknown concept. But there is an element about commercialization. There's an element about impact of the science we do. We're going to approach this in two different parts. We're going to approach this science, the beauty of science for the sake of science, but also science for the sake of impact on economy and on society. Andreu, science for the sake of economical impact, commercialization.
Let me take up this from the point of view of the concept of creative destruction. That was a concept put forward by Joseph Schumpeter, an Austro-Hungarian economist and later a Harvard economist. And his view was that the development of capitalism was marked by waves of creative destruction. That is to say, one technology comes on top of the other, and that's the innovation. But a new technology makes obsolete the old technology, so it destroys a lot. Not only creates, but destroys. And he viewed the development of capitalism this way. And at the same time, he was a pessimist. He was a conservative pessimist. He thought that capitalism was doomed, although he was an aristocrat. Was doomed because he thought that there was an inner contradiction on creative destruction, in the sense that the innovator of today, the destroyer of today, is the conservative of tomorrow. The incumbent technologies, once created and once implanted, become very conservative. They want to prevent to being destroyed by the next innovators. So he had a vision of an economy that will develop towards large corporations that initially creative, but eventually conservative and stagnant. And I think this is relevant to the current capitalism if we think on this X must be for exponential. No, the top example of exponential innovation are the platforms, the digital platforms. And those are magnificent examples of creative destruction. They destroyed a lot of things. They were very innovators, etc. Silicon Valley, but now they establish. Do they still have the economic logic pushes them towards being as innovative as they were in the past?
No.
The answer is the economic logic, no, it does not. Where should the modern versions of the Schumpeter theory, which will be associated with the French economist Philippe Aghion, will postulate you have to manage, you have to regulate, you have to guarantee the right degree of competition, because too much competition is deleterious to innovation. Why? Because innovation has to have incentives. There have to be patents. There has to be a benefit from innovation. You don't want that the gains be expropriated immediately. So there has to too much competition can be bad. Too little competition is for sure bad, because that incentivates maintaining all technologies until you have extracted until the last piece of money from the old technologies. So the right degree is in the middle, and that's very fine-tuned, and that's why there are why there are competition authorities, and why competition authorities are essential to the healthy development of capitalism.
Thank you, Andrei. This balance that you just mentioned is so delicate. Paul and Eduard, do you guys have any comments on that? This balance of commercialization, of basic science, commercial. Where does Perimeter Institute stand on that? What is the ratio of the journals, the nature science papers, and the patents in Perimeter Institute?
I have to be honest, it's 99% curiosity, 1%. But actually, it's an interesting question, because Perimeter was always set up just for basic science. But actually, what we've noticed over the last, I've been running it for about 3 years, 2 years now, 3 years. What we've noticed is that some of those areas, the actual closeness, even though they look so far out in the future, the closeness to being commercial is closer than you think, actually. And so when you have these postdocs working in areas, I'll give you an example, quantum intelligence. A combination of quantum intelligence with machine learning and AI. Yeah, we do it because we want to, probe quantum mechanics, probe the quantum area. But actually, when you put it in the hands of, really brilliant postdocs, they suddenly realize, oh, actually, look how close that is to portfolio optimization in finance. Or look how close that is to last mile optimization for delivery. And so what ended up happening in Perimeter Institute, we funded this fundamental science, and then we funded something called a Pickle Lab, the Perimeter Institute Quantum Intelligence Lab. If you see me wandering around, I'm in a green pickle T-shirt. And in that area, we suddenly ended up with startups, actually. Little startups, homegrown. They go to a creative destruction lab, and then all of a sudden, you ended up with companies coming in there, OneQubit, QEra, Xanadu, people who are in quantum, probably these ring a bell. And they suddenly, it's still open source. We still do basic science within that domain.
That is a great formula.
But we train these people to, think outside the box, and we give them a little bit of patent help, to talk about what would they do if they had an idea, just to put it back in the backs of their minds that sometimes it is closer than they think. And so now a couple of them have patents. One of them even has a minimum viable product. Iyaniku, Estelle Inak. She's from Cameroon. And who would have ever thought? She was offered a job in IBM, but actually she stayed at Perimeter for the freedom, but ended up getting a startup. So I think whether there's a balance, in Perimeter the balance is always for basic science, but I think even with that, I think it tends to transition to some commercialization.
Isn't that beautiful when it's organically happening as opposed to a pushed approach to push towards commercialization and creation of intellectual property and patent? Eduard, what about BIST?
There is to me, there are two different elements here. Where is the engine where the innovation comes from, and what are the incentives and how to align them? On the first part, I think that is relevant to understand that frontier research is fundamental to any possibility of technological development. Technological development is the way we humans articulate the knowledge on how the world works to replicate it in a way that is constructed by humans. This is technology. So if we don't have people properly pushing the frontiers of knowledge, technology cannot evolve. So we have to have institutions like the BIST research centers, like Perimeter, institutions that are clearly focused on pushing those frontiers.
Science.
Now then there is the question of incentives. It is enough to have this pushing of the frontiers of knowledge to then have innovation, a technological transformation. The answer is not really. You need procedures, you need regulations, you need organizational elements, you need people devoted to it. And if you articulate this properly well, the good frontier research creates directly this technological transformation. Now, the question of incentives. It is enough to say we need more innovation. It could be tricky because the answer could be saying, let's do less frontier research and more innovation.
Yes.
And then you are killing the engine. So I was just before the round table, we were talking with Paul about a model that I'm particularly interested in, which is the model of the Weizmann Institute, that more than 50 years ago, they created a company called YEDA, a company 100% owned by the Weizmann Institute, to deal with all the business development of the research. And the CEO of YEDA told me, the key element of this is that this guarantee that Weizmann is just focused on doing the best frontier research possible. That's it. And then YEDA is the one in charge to see how this frontier research could be somehow channeled to technological transformation and to business development. And I think that it's an interesting reflection to see that somehow you need to promote innovation without limiting or killing the efforts on frontier research.
I absolutely agree. And I am concerned about defunding of basic science. I think that will have an impact in decades to come if we stop funding basic science. Science for the sake of science is the result. This is the result of science for the sake of science. We should not stop. And sometimes we have that question asked, taxpayer money. They ask that question, right? Where is my money going and why are we funding basic science? And we need to kind of have these forums where we talk about this. But now I'm going to bring this conversation a little bit closer to impact. Okay, we talked about science for the sake of science, science for the sake of commercialization. Cristina, what about with all your experience, years of experience in the UN? How does technology relate to impact, not just for the countries that are developed countries? How can we make sure that everything we're talking about here has a broader impact that is felt by society in a whole?
Yeah, I think we have heard a lot about individualism, scientists that for the sake of their pleasure, their mental excitement, innovation, etc., just research, etc. But I think here we lack the collective vision of action, and here goes the funding. Without this collective perspective, because resources are scarce, and because we need immense amounts of financial resources to get, even if it's science for science and we end up having a cell phone or just a computer in our hands. So I think this is fundamental. And only with this collective approach, we will be able to design better the efforts for the impact. an example, I think we just saw during the pandemic, how much public resources were geared towards something that we all needed, the vaccine. And how we needed our political leaders to agree on how to finance the innovation, how to get the research done, and how to get it scaled up for us. So for me, this is critical, and this is essential for impact of the society. I don't think the word commercialization is the accurate one. Commercialization relates immediately to a certain benefit, and just for the one that is at the other end of the transaction.
Yes.
And I think here the benefit is for the whole society. So big science infrastructures, they need a lot of financial resources, and it cannot just be left without a very strong vision of public policy, with all the checks and balances, with all the elements that need consensus about where are the resources going to be. And I think Europe is a clear case that is hard, because we have all these states and countries, but collectively we have been able to do better. If we go to the global structures, I have to admit, having worked for the UN not a long time ago, that they are extremely limited. Very, very limited.
Why? In what sense?
Because the lack of financial resources for global processes. The major innovations at global level are done by the private sector. Just one example. Last week, the Secretary General announced the composition of the international panel for the design of a certain organization to control AI, and one of the co-chairs is the Vice President of Alphabet, Google. So here we see the main role. And there is another figure which I think is important. The last 10 years, all the investment gone to AI has been private. 25% of the papers on AI are produced by the big technological companies. So all this we need to correct. We need to correct, otherwise I don't think we'll be able to gain the battle of science for humanity.
I think that on this question of the impact, the regional impact of science and technology, there could be the temptation to say, look, with the new technologies, technologies of information, communication, etc., the world has become flat. So knowledge diffuses much quicker, so that's fantastic for the less developed places, and leave the matter at that. And I think the matter cannot be left at that, because I'm convinced that in spite of all the facilities for long-distance communication, the local effects are still fundamental. The human interaction face-to-face is still fundamental. And let me give personal examples of, I admit, developed places, but then I will say something about less developed. In the 70s of the last century, I lived in San Francisco. And San Francisco at that time was a morose city, a city that thought of itself as all money and decadent. Vitality was in the South, in Hollywood, etc. Well, look at it now. Well, look at it 3 years from now. Now at this moment, they have their problems. Yes. And the turnaround, what's the responsible turnaround? Well, two universities, Berkeley and Stanford. In the 80s, I moved to Boston. and this situation persecutes me. It was all over again the same story. In Boston, the city was morose. Vitality was moving south. First Boston Bank moved to New York. Even the opera was better in New York. Candel, the Nobel Prize, said that he left Harvard for Columbia because opera was better in New York. Route, more seriously, Route 16, or it was 13, or 14, or whatever. That was the breakdown, the failure of the first generation of the computer science industry, digital, WANC, etc. Well, that was in the 80s. Look at them now. Yeah. What was the difference? Again, two names, Harvard and MIT. Of course, you can say all this happens at the most rarefied frontier, and the world lives inside the frontier. And inside the frontier, the economic classification says that you tend to innovation is more imitation than creativity. Yes, all this is true, but adapted to the conditions when you are with respect to the frontier, I always push for having local institutions which are as excellent as you can, even if that generates outflow of talent. Even then, it's worthwhile to try to build these institutions.
I really like that. I feel like there is an invisible impact that some of these centers of knowledge have. Universities are engines. It's like they build ecosystem around and they revitalize. They give life on economy, on the culture, on the impact. I think that that's a very interesting approach to how do we revitalize a city? Just put a very, very good, I don't know, perimeter institute in it, yes. But you know, I'm going to bring it to a question I ask myself a lot, and I asked for permission from this group to ask this question, because it's a little bit of a touchy subject. My fear right now is not AI, it's not robots, it's not genomics. None of these things scare me. I am scared of one thing. I am scared of the new trends that I'm seeing of pushing back science. Mm-hmm. This fear of science and technology that is coming, and we're seeing it. And I feel that a lot because we're in the US. Flat earthers, I mean, so many different kinds of them, we are seeing it. There's a push against established science and technology. And I don't know where it's coming from, and I don't know where it's stemming from. But it's concerning me more than anything, because it could very easily ripple out. Why is it happening? What have we done? Have we created an ivory tower of science that is so unapproachable that now we're getting the pushback from the people who cannot approach it? The gap is so big. They can't reach it, so they reject it. Because it doesn't matter how many vaccines we make, Cristina. If the society or the community pushes back on it, what are we going to do?
But if you allow me, this is investment in education, investment in outreach, investment in making accessible and in a transparent manner what is in there, what is in the devices we are inventing, and this is not easily done. At the same time, we see that, as an example, I think we can make this very clear. There is no doubt about the impact of climate change thanks to the work done by the scientists. Had it not been for the IPCC panel, we would still be having big pockets of people doubting about it. So, in one way, yes, what you say is people push back from science, but at the same time, we're gaining battles because of the scientific research. So that brings me again to the argument that we need public role, public investments in education, in making the complex and difficult issues more understandable to the societies. And somehow, I think that there is some interest by the big technological companies of telling, well, this is too difficult, you just see the results out of it, right? There is a certain interest in the distance.
That is one of the reasons why we actually created Puzzle X. We created Puzzle X because we need a common language to talk about frontiers of science. People talking here, many of them are basic scientists, right? But we put them on a stage and we say, let us bring the science out of our conferences that we all have and we go to and we talk about, but let us bring science closer to decision makers in industry, to decision makers in governments, as well as to the public, to understand, because once we understand, there is not much fear.
Can I give you an example of making science closer to the decision makers? One of the most successful and not expensive decisions that the government took, the Spanish government took a couple of years ago, was to organize a unit in the parliament. In fact, it was not the government, it was the legislative in the parliament, to advise the parliamentarians on basic issues that the parliamentarians were discussing from a science point of view. And it's been very successful. So the Office of Scientific Affairs of the Legislative of the Spanish government is absolutely an example of what you say. We need our parliamentarians, which they are not, most of them are not scientists, have different backgrounds, to have the knowledge and the information from the scientific point of view. And this is fantastic to form well-informed decision-making.
I think, yeah, it's a really interesting point, actually, because I think it's incumbent upon us to speak at a level where people understand it. Science is complex, especially people talk about quantum, right? I mean, it's not easily understood. Schrodinger's cat.
We've got one in the dark tunnel, guys. Go look at that and play some quantum games later.
But it's interesting, Canada did something very similar. Minister Kirsty Duncan at the time set up a parliamentary committee on science and invites us to sit in front of a cross-party panel and talk about certain areas, talent development or fundamental science, so that they can become more eloquent themselves when they're speaking to their constituents. And I felt that was a really big step forward for Canada, actually. They range across the whole range of sciences, right from social sciences right through to the physical sciences, because I think, although we maybe seem different, the interface between them is a really important area, actually, and so they have mixed panels as well. So I think it's really up for us to stand up there and kind of talk it through. I will say I'm kind of positive about the future. I think you see the next generation coming in through Perimeter. They're enthusiastic, go-getters. They learn in a different way.
Paul, I live in the South. I live in Tennessee. And what I'm seeing concerns me.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing is not in the elite. We sit here, we don't feel that there is a problem. Step outside and you will see a different sentiment. And I'm afraid of us ignoring that sentiment towards science. And I think that this will help. All the educational outreach that we do from science inwards, I think helps.
Yes, I was yesterday. I was in a session with the Minister of Education of Portugal, and he showed us perfect correlation data that they have in Portugal between the level of education and the beliefs on conspiracy theory.
Interesting.
And he said the correlation was perfect, and this brings me to the big UNESCO report on education, the Futures of Education report that was presented in late 2021, that one of the things that it says is that governments had been focused on imagining education as a good that owns to the person that enjoys it. So an individual good. And this could be understood that way when you think in your own life development. Now, the problem is that it has impact in the life of the others. So the reason why education should be considered a common good is precisely because the bad education that another citizen has is not just a competitive advantage for you. It's a negative advantage for your community.
Yes.
Because you're going to have people that is going to be in your community that is not going to be able to properly contribute, but also is going to be a voter that believes in conspiracy theories, that imagine that climate change is something absurd, or that investment in science is just something useless. So, yes, I think that scientific institutions should devote efforts on outreach, should do so not just on the logic of promoting scientific vocations, which is something nice, but also to contribute to scientific culturalization of the whole community. This is fundamental to understand, to break a little bit, as Cristina was saying, the separation between humanities and science, and entering into the logic of knowledge as the main driven of the evolution of society, and also as a ground of living together. But beyond all of that, we, scientific institutions, decision makers, citizens, should be aware that this trend can only be stopped by making sure that all future citizens have a proper education, understanding that science is the way that we humans have to check facts, to use doubt as a way to enter into the curiosity and to contrast, and to not believe in just what we see, but in what we could contrast with others.
I like those.
Can I add
Please.
something? It might look I'm obsessed with the pandemic, but I want to mention the following as well. During those more than a year that we were quite worried about our health and our future, etc., there was, and those are figures from our National Foundation for Science and Technology, FECIT. We were much more following than before the science advances that were being produced. So there was an interest on outreach and information. And it peaked. It peaked during 22, and now it's gone down again. So it's a clear example that when the societies feel that we need science to really advance, we do the efforts to be more informed, and we receive more input. So I think what you mentioned is very important. We need to ensure that we are constantly giving inputs of information to the citizens and ensuring they are the best informed possible. They'll be better voters.
Absolutely. Andreu, may I look to you for some?
I concur with everything that Cap said, but let me go to your initial question. I think that democracy is messy, and is also messy for the matters of research, but at the end is the winning strategy. The dictatorships are very fond of science. They are not enemies of science. I mean, they understand that you need science for weapons, and you need science for keeping the citizens down, and they also want good health for their citizens, so they will not be restive. But science needs as an essential ingredient a range of free thinking, of curiosity thought, of no constraint on the directions that the science can take. All of us have seen the movie, no? The Oppenheimer. So you could say that that's the difference. Germany was a dictatorship, and it destroyed its good universities. And the US gained the scientists that Germany was expelling. And at the end, the democracies prevailed with superior technology. The technology of war, admittedly, but superior technology. And is that this ingredient is essential. The organization of research has two prototypes that have to live together. There is the mission-oriented institution that includes the corporate research. Corporate research has a name which we call profits or whatever, or a moonshot or the Manhattan Project. And those are hierarchical organizations. Yes. Everybody knows what it has to be done, more or less. And then there is the curiosity institutions, which are the academic institutions, which are defined by the fact that there are the hierarchies inside the institutions are small hierarchies. When one looks at a university these days, it looks organizationally old-fashioned because it's a collection of small businesses. The lab, each lab is a vertical organization, but it's just a lab. The whole thing is a collection of small labs, so it doesn't look modern. But it is what historically has taken, and it's what it takes. An anecdote. I was for 1 year serving in the European Research Council, and we had the puzzle of why big corporations were not getting ERCs, were not applying to ERCs. Very few were applying to ERCs when the law is very clear. A big corporation can have ERCs. So we made a small meeting, actually in the Solvay meeting, in the same room where in the 20s there were the Solvay conferences, much lower level. And we asked them why. And one, I won't say which, confess the reason. Say, well, we asked for them because we pay taxes and we consider that we must have a return. But there is a difficulty. We don't like the idea of researchers having their own money. So a firm and a vertical organization is obvious. Cannot have somebody there with his own money. What does this mean in an enterprise? And let me say a word on the previous on intellectual property and regions. The public support of basic science has been historically used to promote also the economy. More or less, scientists also get, universities get a mission that their knowledge ends up, not a hierarchical mission, but a mission, that their research ends up in the market. And the limit case, which is the US, that this has been done, is by passing all the knowledge generated by basic research to the researchers and to the universities for them to go to the market and retain none. And these days there have been criticism of that. This is becoming controversial. And the argument is made, and I think it has some basis, that the public sector should retain some of the intellectual property that their basic science generates in order to promote, and those are proposals of Gruber and Johnson, of two professors at MIT, in order to promote regional growth.
Well, thank you so much, Andreu. We have 1 minute left, so I want to ask one question, and this is a personal question. Beyond what you do, regardless of what your own field is, Which part of exponential technology and science are you most excited about? What is the one that is like really right now fascinating to you? For me, it's biocomputation. We've got Catalog speaking in a company Catalog speaking about biocomputation and DNA computation in half an hour. But what is it for you guys? Because for me, it really drives my curiosity. Paul, I'm really curious. What about you?
Okay, as long as you take the hype out of it, but I would say quantum simulation of materials is potentially revolutionary in the future for medicine and for quantum matter, those kinds of areas. I think it's exciting.
Materializing the world with simulation, right? Okay, I like that one. What about you?
You ask what we are more excited about, or what we think that is going to have the highest
I'm
impact?
asking what are you are most excited? What is that field that is really exciting you right now?
I'm excited half for quantum technologies and half for artificial intelligence. One is
Good mix.
to understand that the world could act in a way that we couldn't imagine and that we still cannot understand how. And the other is that what we thought that it was, what defined what humans were, could be replicated somehow. And the two things are puzzling, and existentially puzzling.
And if you're interested in that, Sir Roger Penrose is going to be talking about consciousness and quantum. So can we really replicate humans with AI? He says no. So,
Well, I'll take the position of a public servant. I tend to be more than excited, worried by all these technologies, because I think we need to define how the public sector is going to develop instruments to ensure that these advancements do benefit the society as a whole. So maybe my word is more worriness than excitement.
Andrew, what excites you in science right now?
For the economic, what excites me doesn't matter. But for economic impact, I say fusion.
Interesting.
Because if you solve the energy problem, you solve many, many problems.
Wow, and we have a fusion talk on November 9th. So we have artificial intelligence and quantum, we've got materialization, and we have fusion. We've covered all of the exciting topics. Well, thank you so much, my wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for spending the time. Thank you for your thought leadership, and thank you all for being a part of this conversation. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.